Action.
Hey guys, Allegra and Melissa here. We are going to be talking to you all about Gestalt theory and practice. So Gestalt theory, as defined by the Berlin School of Gestalt Psychology, states the whole precedes the parts, and Gestalt formation is a primary characteristic of individual functioning and also of the individual movement towards closure/satisfaction to return to a state of equilibrium. Also synonymous with Gestalt theory is this picture where the sum of the whole is not greater than the whole in itself. So we see the two faces as well as the two vases or the candlestick holder. So the history of Gestalt psychology, or the history of Gestalt theory, stems from Gestalt psychology. And so Gestalt psychology has its roots right after the period, right after World War I. There was this rise in existentialism as well as expressionism. So a rise in trying to understand the meaning of human beings in relationship to their world and their environments around them, and then being able to explain that meaning through creative arts or creative measures. Graf Christian von Efferfranz, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, he was actually given credit as coining the term Gestalt, meaning the whole formed by the structuring of the perceptual field. Gestalt psychology really came about as a way of being able to interpret things in the world, looking at proximity, closure, symmetry, similarity, and things like that. That's kind of what you saw in that first picture. Individuals that really contributed to the Gestalt psychology school of thought were Wertheimer, Kohler, and Kafka. They really talked about how an experience determined by the whole instead of the individual pieces of data. They also talked about how data is interpreted based on an individual's needs, their desires, their urges. So there was this emphasis on the whole versus just the parts. Kurt Lewin also contributed to Gestalt psychology, specifically to the notion of unfinished business and what does unfinished business do to the individual or the organism as a whole. So the theory of Gestalt, the Gestalt theory really derived from Frederick or Fritz and then Laura Perls. Both were trained in psychoanalytic measures. Fritz was a psychiatrist and Laura was a psychologist. They, and Fritz mostly, really believed in the self-actualizing potential of the individual, which assumes that an individual ultimately knows what's best for their own self-regulation. And so Fritz really developed the theory of, or Gestalt theory, based on the schools of thought of a couple other individuals. Most notably, though, are Karen Horney and Wilhelm Reich. In their school of thought, they had a belief that a less detached and more active therapeutic role was the way to better assist individuals. So Fritz adopted that. They also looked at the environment-oriented view of neurosis, but really what Fritz took from that was that the environment has a larger effect on the individual as a whole. And then breath and body-oriented approaches, and then there was a differential method of working on resistance, which he also adopted from Wilhelm Reich. Otto Rank also contributed to Fritz's Gestalt theory, specifically on the here and now. And instead of remembering, there was an emphasis on re-experiencing and repeating, which again calls for this more active role of the therapist. So here you kind of see the merging of what Karen Horney and Otto Rank both kind of described individually. Lastly, Jan Smuts was another contributor to Gestalt theory with his theory of holism. And this was that self-regulating entity, the holistic organism, contains its past and much of its future in its present. And so this is sort of where we look at the individual is capable of self-regulation, self-actualization, and self-support in the here and now. So we kind of see how all three of these blend together to sort of develop what we see at the end, which is the phenomenological method and the holistic perspective. So there's meaningful intervention as well as an understanding that an individual is viewed in the sum of its parts and its whole totality. So the key concept of Gestalt theory are wholeness, awareness, excitement, action, contact, figure and ground, self-regulation, and then of course the here and now. So wholeness, again, Gestalt theory looks at an individual in their entire package. There is a emphasis on awareness as opposed to change, right? So the therapist or the clinician is focusing on developing awareness in the individual. There's also this concept of this excitement, which is the development of an action tendency. And so that development is what leads to action, right? And so action is where individuals are preparing for a need to be satisfied within their cycle. The concept of contact is extremely important when it comes to Gestalt theory. Contact is defined as the exchange between the individual and the environment. Instead of taking on the pathology sort of view, Gestalt theory looks at dysfunction occurring from an interruption in a cycle, and we'll see that shortly. But this interruption at any stage is resulting from resistance to contact. So there's an emphasis on awareness and using awareness to pinpoint where contact needs to be made. Figuring ground is also specifically related to Gestalt theory. There is the concept of a need arises within the individual, and the only way that someone knows about the need is if they have increased awareness. The need can either be in the foreground for the time that it's present, and if it gets satisfied, then it retreats to the background. If it doesn't retreat to the background and it's not addressed, this is where we might see the resemblance of pathology become apparent. Needs can be blocked by unclear sensations or lack of awareness of one's needs, hence the momentum towards increased awareness. Self-regulation is also synonymous with Gestalt theory. There's this view of personal responsibility, the ability to self-actualize, and the ability to self-support. And then the here and now. Gestalt theory doesn't discredit or disregard the past, but instead it looks at blockages or instances in the past that are inhibiting what's going on in the here and now, or what's going on in the present. So as you can see, this is the experience cycle. And so if we start on the left, we'll see a sensation arises, right? And so this is the beginning of awareness. Then we move into awareness, which is the awareness that a need exists. Then there is the mobilization phase, which is when one is preparing for action. So stages of change, think about the preparation stage. Then there's action, so acting to meet the need. And then contact is the meeting of the need. Now there's a distinction between these two. And if contact is successful, then there'll be an assimilation of the need met, meaning there'll be satisfaction for the individual, and then letting go or withdrawal, or the need retreating to the background. Now, if there is a disruption at any point along this part of the cycle, this is where Pearls states that increased awareness needs to occur so that contact can come into play, so that individuals can continue to process and ultimately satisfy and then withdraw or resolve those needs.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the intervention, which derived from Gestalt theory, which is Gestalt therapy. So essentially, Gestalt therapy focuses on the client's innate ability to solve their own problems. So it believes that the client already has the necessary skills and tools within themselves in order to solve their issues. And the therapist then serves as more of a guide or facilitator through the therapeutic process. There's an importance of authenticity in the therapist. So the therapist employing this intervention needs to have an awareness and self-actualization themselves in order to successfully deliver the intervention, or else it can be confusing for both the client and the therapist. So there needs to be a high level of skill. And then Gestalt therapy focuses on techniques that they utilize to help the client, first of all, have awareness of the here and now, and then second of all, to help them re-experience things of the past, which again connects to the here and now. So the techniques employed are employed in order to finish that sort of unfinished material of the past that manifests itself in the here and now, be it in the sort of pathology. And then speaking of pathology, there isn't really a pathological focus. So, not to say that the therapy doesn't have any goals or tries to better clients, but not in the sense of pathology. So we're not treating the client for depression, we're treating the client for their past experiences that prevent them from existing in the here and now and prevent them from moving forward. And then most Gestalt therapists refrain from specific goal setting, which is traditional of other therapies, and they sort of gear towards a more general goals, which I'll discuss. So the clinical goals are to increase the variety of behaviors used by the client. So instead of, for example, self-deprecating behaviors, they could be wellness sort of goals, like exercising more, eating healthier, sort of increase the repertoire of behaviors that a client uses. Encouraging clients to take more responsibility for their lives. So there's the belief that a client can't control their environment or the people in their environment, but they can control their reactions to that environment. So sort of taking responsibilities for their actions as a response to environmental factors. And then completing unfinished business from the past and integrating these experiences into the present. So this is sort of the core of Gestalt theory and the Gestalt therapy. So reliving the past in order to live in the present, in the here and now. That's the core of Gestalt. And then within the therapeutic process, there will be an increased opportunities for clients to feel and act stronger, more competent, and self-supported with conscious and responsible choices, because they're aware of the thing that happened in the past is no longer affecting me, and now I'm in the here and now. So these are the disturbances or processes which can be compared to sort of cognitive distortions of Gestalt therapy, though they don't refer to them as that, as there's not a pathological focus. These are just the processes that some clients go through that prevent them from living in the here and now. So the first major one is confluence. So that's a denial of differences and unrealistic focus on similarities. So an example would be a couple focusing on their differences and things that they fight over rather than what brings them together. Can be compared to generalization. And then there's introjection, so that's inappropriate intake of information from others, like parents or other significant historical figures, maybe teachers. So these are the thoughts like I should, I have to, I must. That's introjection. Projection is denying responsibility of parts of oneself and projecting those onto others. So denying the responsibility you had, for example, in doing drugs, and blaming that on another person, projecting your feelings of worthlessness onto others instead of feeling them yourself. Retroflexion. This is a process during which individuals do to themselves what they would like someone to do for them. An example being a child who suffered from neglect as an adult now not engaging in social support and only relying on themselves to fill the need of support and care instead of relationships with others. And these are the techniques or experiments that are utilized in a Gestalt session. So dialogue is the most common one. So this is the empty chair technique. So a client will sit next to an empty chair and the therapist will facilitate a relived experience. For example, a client talking about something with their dad or reliving a negative experience they had with their father. The father will essentially be in the chair next to them, and the therapist is guiding the client through that experience so they can say what they want to say and listen to what their father would have said. Then enactment of dreams. So clients can be encouraged to act out their dreams as an expression of their current Gestalt, of their current being. So this is different than interpretation of dreams. So a client will be asked to enact their dreams instead of in order to bring awareness to what's happening in the here and now, as the belief is dreams are a reflection of the here and now. An exaggeration, so a client may be asked to exaggerate a particular movement, such as leg shaking, in order to bring awareness to the leg shaking. Reversal, stating the opposite. So a client might say, I'm never gonna run a marathon. The reversal would be, I run marathons. And this is just sort of to shift the way of thinking. Rehearsal, which is a commonly used technique in many therapeutic sessions. So rehearsing what you might say to a boss, a friend, a spouse. Making the rounds is basically a group technique of rehearsal where you get feedback from the group. Exposing the obvious, for example, a client who is shaking their leg the whole session, the therapist might say, you've been really shaking your leg the whole session. And in doing that, the client is now aware of their leg shaking. So that's the point of exposing the obvious. Directed awareness, so these are experiments that help clients establish contact with different inner and outer experiences. So think of it kind of as guided meditation. So a client may be guided to notice how they feel in their body, in their mind, as the therapist guides them through reliving an experience from their childhood or something like that.
Okay, so some of the strengths of this theory are that it allows for the client to be viewed as the expert, which engages the therapist as a guide as opposed to the expert. There's an emphasis on the here and now, which encourages present focus intervention, and then that can allow for increased self-actualization and self-support. It also increases self-awareness, and the goal of that is to increase emotional regulation, and then that will also promote more responsibility for one's actions. There's an adoption of the person and environment perspective, so it views issues or conditions within the environment as affecting the individual. It does not require the individual to focus on change as a therapeutic goal, rather increased awareness, which allows the client to work at their own pace and the clinician can meet them where they are. And then lastly, there's a classification of needs and dysfunction as opposed to pathology. So dysfunction is viewed as the cause of difficulty and unmet needs causing setbacks or blocks, as opposed to the client having an inherent issue.
And these are what we see as the limitations of the theory and intervention. So Gestalt theory has limited research training and educational opportunities due to the limited research. It's not as strongly researched as like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. So it's limited in that regards. As Fritz Perls, he only published, I think, one text on the subject, and after he passed, there was less advocacy for the training, and we tend to not learn the treatment modality in our programs of study. So another limitation that I think is that providing Gestalt therapy, employing this type of therapy takes a very skilled clinician, because in reliving experiences, you are placing the client in a very vulnerable state. And then in order to reorient the client after that, it takes a variety of skill, and it can be difficult for someone who's not trained well in that treatment modality to employ that type of therapy. So inconsistencies in theoretical development is another limitation. Like Allegra said, it's kind of a hybrid of many different theories that Fritz Perls kind of adopted from different people. So it can be seen as not as well regarded as other theories. Some people might think it's just made up, it's not as unique. And then there's an increased risk when working with individuals who are in active psychosis. So it's hard to be in the here and now if you can't really differentiate reality from not reality. So that's another limitation of it. And then the last limitation that I think is the merging of boundaries between clients and therapists, as you might have to cross over into you might have to cross physical boundaries in order to establish contact for the client. Thank you.